Hey, it's Martin Nutty, and you're listening to the Irish Stew podcast. This is the second episode in a series I recorded at the Capital Irish Film Festival earlier this year. Now, that event is hosted by the Washington, D.C. arts organisation, Solas Nua. For those of you that speak Irish or Gaeilge, that name means New Light. The festival itself is a significant undertaking, spread over 4 days, and I wanted to understand more about Solas Nua and what it takes to deliver the best of Irish culture in the nation's capital. To that end, I sat down with board co-chair Kate Meenan-Waugh, executive director Andrew Dolan, and artistic director of theatre Rex Daugherty. A big thank you to festival director Maeve McCullough, who helped set up these conversations, and for being such a wonderful host during my trip down to DC. Before we start, you'll notice the absence of my co-host John Lee in these episodes. Sadly, John's older brother, Daniel Lee, passed away shortly before our DC departure. Dan had suffered through a long illness, but the end came abruptly. He was a lifelong educator and leader in independent school education. John tells me Dan's nickname in the family was the Irish King, and so these episodes have been made in the Irish King's memory. May he rest in peace. Now let's hear from the folks of Solas Nua. First up is board co-chair Kate Meenan-Waugh. Welcome, Kate Meenan-Waugh, to Irish Stew. I was struck by your double-barreled name, and I recall from back in my days in high school growing up in Ireland, having to read Evelyn Waugh. Oh. Is there a tie there?
There is no tie. Mm-hmm. And as my adored late husband used to say, because that was his name, after the man died, no check arrived. So that's how we knew that. Meenan actually is Mimna, M-I-M-N-A-G-H. Mm-hmm. It was changed to Meenan by my grandfather when he moved from Tyrone to Belfast in search of work. And he assumed anglicizing that Mimna a bit would open up his possibilities in terms of employment. So he started to raise his family there. My father was born there, the last of 6 children. And my father's mother passed away shortly after he was born. So my father and his next couple siblings ahead of him were actually wards of the church, as my grandfather had taken his older sons to the U.S. to make their way and to find the streets paved with gold. Because left with 5, 6 children, what was he going to do? Came from a very large family, and the family at that time was just not able to take the kids in. That's my Irish origin story. Mm-hmm. My father ended up joining his father and his older siblings right after World War II, 1946. Emigrated to New York, where there was a whole cluster of Tyrones and Northern Irish up in the Bronx, and met my Irish-American mother, and the rest in terms of my origin story is history.
And you're a New Yorker.
Yeah, born in New York. I was actually born in Manhattan, but the family ties were in the Bronx.
So talk to me about the migration then south to Washington, D.C. How did you fetch up in this part of the world?
I met my husband in the Irish-American community in New York. I started taking Irish lessons at John Jay College. My father, despite always identifying as Irish, never wore his Irishness on his sleeve and never went back until nearly 40 years later. But when I moved to New York after college, I just felt like I wanted to touch some of that Irishness. So I saw a sign about classes in Irish, and I thought, well, I have a little bit of an affinity for language. I'll try that. No, the hardest language I've ever studied. But it certainly got me into a community of now lifelong friends, and we decided to bond over our fellow Irishness, and actually got involved in several different kinds of things that were happening in the early 80s in New York in terms of being Irish, and actually met my husband at a reception. And what drew us together was our both being what we call first-generation Irish, the children of Irish born, as well as many other things. But as we started raising our very young and adorable family, we realized New York was very expensive, and work enabled both of us to come to Washington, D.C., which is what we did in 1988. I've been here ever since.
And you're an educator by profession.
Yes.
I understand something like 40 years.
Yes. I actually studied diplomacy at Georgetown School of Foreign Service, but found my way to education and loved it, and was always involved in teaching history, geography, global education, working on curriculum, helping teachers understand how to make history more global, and helping students and teachers understand how something as simple as helping people out, whether here or abroad, speaks to a larger mission of being compassionate with people's needs.
And you yourself, I understand from your bio, did a year studying abroad when you were in high school.
Oh, yes.
So how did that change you? Because I imagine a young person at that point in their life, that is a massive thing to do, especially 40, 50 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I went to a very large public high school in the middle of Pennsylvania, because by that time my father's job had taken us to many places in Pennsylvania. And there were 500 people just in my class. And I had to get out. I knew the world was bigger. And I signed up for a program that normally people would go for a summer. And I said, no, I want to go for the year. And everybody thought I was nuts. But I said, no, I want to go. So I was dropped in the middle of a very small Flemish town in Flemish, Belgium, speaking not a word of Flemish, living with the most wonderful host family. I went to an all-girls Catholic school with a total of 40 students. It was quite a change, but it certainly made me realize that anything I did with my life would be beyond what I could see in front of me. And that's why I chose to study at Georgetown. It's why even as I was trying to figure out what to do with that, as I came into education, I realized education is a way to broaden the world for kids. How are you teaching them? How are you helping them think critically about what's happening in the world? So that was always very important. But yeah, that year was transformative, absolutely.
Yeah. I often say to people, peers that might have no longer peers, but maybe the children of peers that are now having children, that one of the best things you can do for a child is have them live extensively away during their educational process, because it really changes perspective.
Yep.
And part of the Irish tradition, of course, and if you look at the literary tradition, some of the greatest Irish writers are those that
went away.
And it was only then that they crystallized their understanding of Ireland and what it means to be Irish, and did some of their greatest work. Obviously, James Joyce is the exemplar of that.
And I certainly had that experience, because when I was there, as many teenagers in the U.S., we were very aware and involved as we could be in the anti-war movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement. And one of my duties as being this exchange student, because I was sponsored by a particular group, was to do a slideshow and an old-timey slide carousel with the local Rotary Club in this small Flemish town. And I walked into this room with 30 gentlemen who were already on their third or fourth pint. I was 16. I was the only woman there. And I'm doing my slideshow of the cows of Lancaster County and the lovely verdant green fields and all this kind of stuff. And people started questioning me about the Vietnam War. And what were we doing? And all of a sudden, I became
16-year-old experts.
I became very patriotic. And I was like, yes, it's awful, but we have reasons for being there. And of course, it was interesting. And just because of the kind of person I was. Oh, and then there were also questions about civil rights movement, etc. So I said, I'm curious about a sign I see down by the train station. And the sign always said in French, no entrance to North Africans. And this was the train station of this little town. So I said, so what is that sign about? Why do certain cafes not allow people from North Africa? Oh, that's different. And they're going on and on. So I had to learn to be feisty at an early age. And again, that was another transformative piece of that year. But
yeah, bigotry can be found in many places.
Yeah. And it's interesting that people will not assume it's bigotry. They assume it's normal, that it's the way it's supposed to be, until it touches something else.
Yeah, I think we can become suffused by a culture
Yeah.
where stuff is normalized, and it's good when somebody comes in and brings some oxygen into the room and you get some reconsideration. But you had a long career in education, and I understand Solas Nua this year, you're the chair, is celebrating its 20th anniversary.
20th anniversary, absolutely, yep.
Can you tell us a little bit about the origin story behind Solas Nua?
I didn't come into Solas Nua until 2014. I knew nothing about it. And on a St. Patrick's Day of 2014, I was coming up out of the metro. And in our house, in our family growing up, St. Patrick's Day was never celebrated. Like I said, we didn't wear our Irishness on our sleeve. We knew we were. And my father would occasionally sing Old Danny Boy at a memorial service or something like that. But coming up the escalator, and somebody gave me a book. And it's midday, so people are already drinking green beer and wearing the green hats, all the kind of stuff that I always found repulsive. And somebody gave me a book of Irish literature, and I was dumbstruck. I said, "What is this?" They said, "Happy St. Patrick's Day from Solas Nua, Happy Irish Book Day." So I thought, I need to know about these people, because art and literature, theater, those are the ways that we can really understand what it means to be Irish, and what it means to be Irish now, what it means to be Irish in Ireland. And this is why Solas Nua appealed to me. I had read Joyce and Yeats, but I was interested in what's happening now in Ireland. And so the arts as a contemporary expression of that is what Solas Nua is all about. In terms of what a board does for any arts organization, it helps the organization to stay on mission. And as our mission is to present the best of contemporary Irish arts to our audiences, that's what appealed to me. I want to be a part of that. I want to get involved.
So there's a network of Irish centers across major U.S. cities in the United States. Obviously, we're sitting in the capital here. Is there different challenges for Solas Nua in Washington, D.C.? It strikes me that this is a city of a lot of times of transition. People come, people go. It is more of an institutional place, obviously being the center of government. But I wonder, does that have an impact, or is there something unique about the Solas Nua experience?
I think one of the things that's very unique about Solas Nua, even in contrast to some of the other centers around the country, is we don't have a brick and mortar presence. So everything we do has to be either site-specific, and we've done many outdoor presentations, performances. It has to be in partnership with performance venues. AFI here is a perfect example. We couldn't do the film festival without partnering with an appropriate movie theater. So it's an issue of being nimble in a city where being nimble carries great value. Let me put it that way. And I think our most amazing example of our nimbleness was during the pandemic shutdown. Many other arts organizations in DC, the first thought was, how are we going to keep the mortgage going, keep the lights on, keep the heat on? We didn't have to worry about that because we didn't have that building. So we quickly transitioned to doing digital things, digital theater, film online, all that kind of thing. And then here we are in Washington, where you're right, there's a transition, there's people going in and out all the time, but there is a core of people who are either Irish American or Irish affinity folks, let's put it that way. Because you don't have to be Irish to love things Irish. So we have that broad audience, and our audience sometimes even will be only for a specific type of performance. We have people who come to the film festival, that's all they do. We have people who go to our theater events, that's all they do. We have many people who will come to all of our events, but being a multi-arts organization, it allows us to capture as many different interests and types of people who are interested in those things as possible. So great advantage to being in Washington. And of course, we always have to thank the partnership we have with the embassy here in Washington. It was mentioned last night during our presentations, through not just support of the Irish government, but specifically their immigrant support program. We're able to do so much here. We're also supported by the DC Commission on Arts and Humanities, because so much of what we do is free. And it's free because we want to make sure we're able to reach as many people as possible. So we don't want the barrier of a ticket price to keep somebody out of a play reading or keep somebody out of a literary event or something like that. Yeah, I'm glad we're in a city. I think it would be tough if we were in a smaller town, but being in a city that has relatively good public transportation means that as we look at places to do our performances, we're thinking, can people get there? Do people feel safe there? Are there people from that community that have never seen one of our shows? Let's do something there.
Is the lack of a physical facility, and may not be a lack at all, so I use the term advisedly, does that present challenges, let's say, on the fundraising front? Because organizations like Solas Nua are deeply, you rely on fundraising, obviously, for operating.
Absolutely.
So you can't bring somebody in and say, oh, here is our theater and here is our offices and performance spaces, etc.
Yeah.
So talk to me about the lack of a physical location.
I think a challenge that it does present is, if you're going to have the formal sit down with a potential funder around the conference table and do the PowerPoint and all that kind of thing, that's not going to be doable. Those kinds of conversations we have with people happen in places like this. In coffee shops, happens in the lobby of an office building or something like that. And we invite people to come to one of our events. That's the best way that we can showcase who we are. So instead of having to come to our office and have a cup of coffee, come to a coffee shop, and then come join us at a theater performance, or come see one of our films, or listen to some of the music that we have on. So I don't necessarily see it as a challenge. I see fundraising as a whole as a challenge. And certainly I think it would be naive to think that these next months and years are going to be really difficult for arts organizations, particularly those that do have some dependency on public support. I mean, here in the DC area, what's happened in the last month may in fact affect the way the budget is fashioned for the next year. So we have to make sure that the DC Council and the DC government understands how important the arts are as a way of sort of processing and understanding what's happening in your everyday life. It would be naive to think that things are going to be hunky-dory for the next couple of years. But no, I don't think not having a brick and mortar affects our fundraising. Obviously, we don't ever engage in a capital campaign, because that generally means building and etc. Our capital campaign is one that gives us the money and the resources and endowment, really, in a way, to continue to bring fabulous Irish artists to this audience. I don't think we need to have a brick and mortar. I will say that another thing the pandemic taught us was you can do so much with Zoom and Skype and everything else. Yeah, the best thing is to be in the room with somebody, but think about how Zoom has made a meeting between somebody in Washington, Dublin, and Berlin so much easier. How would you have that meeting before? You might have had a phone call with a speaker on the table or something like that, but just being able to see people on screen is a big help. Obviously, it would be great if we could all be around the table together, but in terms of collaboration, it just opened up a huge number of possibilities.
So Solas Nua has now got 20 years in the...
We're launching our 20th at St. Patrick's weekend. Absolutely, yep.
Big congratulations on that. Looking out towards the future, 10 years from now, what would your hopes be for the organization?
That's an interesting question. I think the hope would be that people continue to think of us when they think of quality Irish theater, when they think of quality Irish film, when they think of quality Irish literature, the opportunity to meet authors, the opportunity to meet filmmakers, to meet producers, directors, actors, the opportunity to meet musicians. I hope that is always something that we're the first people they think of if they live here in this area. And I also hope that we continue, and this is something you'll have fun talking with both Rex and Andrew about, we continue to be an incubator for a lot of artists that do come over and are supported by the government of Ireland as they come over, and helping other parts of the country understand how we can facilitate these people coming to your place, doing a performance in Minneapolis or doing a performance in Portland or something like that. This ability to really capitalize on the fact that we are the capital. I know that's redundant, but that we really do have a place in being a launch pad for Irish artists as they come over. And we're very proud of that. And I think that's something that will continue and grow over the years. And who knows, if somebody drops $1 zillion on us, maybe we'll find a brick and mortar.
So for any of the zillionaires out there listening.
Yes. Okay, we are Solas Nua, 1777 Church Street. So our address is actually, for all intents and purposes, a post office box. And the mail is checked regularly. No, but seriously, that would be fabulous, and it would be an incredible gift. And I think anything we do, we have to ask ourselves, does it make sense for us? Does it fit the mission? Is it going to hinder the mission? Like I said, we're not in a position right now to start a massive capital campaign to build a theater or a building. Our resources and our time and human resources are really formulating programs that we know we can do and things that we know we can do with partners on the ground. So that's the most important thing for us right now. So collaboration, cooperation, that's what we're all about in terms of venues.
So, Kate, Meenan-Waugh, thank you so much for taking the time and giving us some insider insight in Solas Nua, and it's one of the major building blocks of the network of Irish organizations that continue to foster and bind North America back to the home island. So thank you.
Thank you.
After my conversation with Kate, I sat down with Andrew Dolan and Rex Dougherty to get their insights on Solas Nua from that day-to-day operational perspective. I'm joined in the room by Andrew Dolan, Executive Director of Solas Nua, and Rex Dougherty, who is the Artistic Director of Theatre at Solas Nua. So, gentlemen, welcome to the Irish Stew podcast.
Thanks for having us.
We're 20 years into the existence of Solas Nua, and I'm going to start with you, Rex, because apparently you know something of the back history of the organization.
Yeah, I've been here a minute in a couple different capacities, but Linda Murray was our founding artistic director, and she really operated as artistic director and executive director, and she was the visionary for setting up the company, started in 2005. And our very first production was Enda Walsh's Disco Pigs, Enda's first play that he's gone on to such great things. And if in the early aughts, there was such an amazing bumper crop of new Irish work that wasn't making its way to this side of the Atlantic. If you weren't Martin McDonagh or Conor McPherson in the theater world, your work wasn't getting off the island. And Linda really was a champion for saying, hey, there's all these great historical Irish works. There's these two sort of juggernauts of Irish theater, but there's so much more. Enda Walsh, Marina Carr, Mark O'Rourke, Owen McCafferty. The very first thing was a theater, but it was always intended to be multidisciplinary, so quickly expanded into literature and film. This year is our 19th film festival. Just made a big splash, and it was great to be in Washington, D.C. with just the embassy there, and they've been longtime partners to champion all the new Irish work that's coming off the island. And that's still true to this day. If you aren't some of those really big name artists, there's not a home for you abroad. And that's where Solas Nua has really carved out its space. Us and Irish Arts Center really are the only multidisciplinary companies in the United States that are a regular 12-month home for Irish artists abroad. So we're really happy to keep that legacy going, but that's what we set up shop as and has always been the focus. But yeah, Linda's work she had a dance and theater background, but we would bring Irish directors over, like Des Kennedy, who now runs the Everyman in Cork. He also has directed the Harry Potter production around the world. That was the West End and Broadway. But he was an early director with us. He directed me in a 2-person show in, 2010, I think. And we were doing premieres and world premieres, and we established Irish Book Day as our countercultural answer to how St. Patrick's Day is celebrated in the United States.
Yeah, and I sat down with Kate Meenan-Waugh, and she told me that was her introduction into Solas Nua, was literally a book shoved into her hand on St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah.
And she said, I had to learn more about this organization. And I was fascinated by, unlike your compadres down in New York City with the Irish Arts Centre, who have a big facility, you, on the other hand, do not. And so I'll throw this one to you, Andrew. The challenges of not having physical location, a strength or a problem?
I think it's great to not have a space, because then every project, every artist we work with starts from the question, what does the artist need? Do they need a gallery? Do they need a theater? Are they looking for found space? Should we do it in a movie theater, or should we perform in a field? We have done so much site-specific work, and that is the beginning question. And a lot of our work centers from what do Irish artists need, and how can we provide that? And that allows us to have partnerships with so many amazing organizations. So, for example, this last summer, we were able to bring Panty Bliss to DC, but we did that through a partnership with Studio Theater, which is a fantastic organization that presents contemporary work. And so we were able to introduce Panty Bliss, the Queen of Ireland, to a whole new audience who likes contemporary work but might not know Panty Bliss. And we're able to accomplish a lot of that through partnerships. And so our model is driven primarily through the different partnerships that we can make in Washington, D.C., and there's so many great organizations in D.C. And because we have been spending time with that partnership model in the last few years, we've begun to invest more energy and resources into saying, hey, if we're going to be a home for artists and put them in multiple venues, what more does it take to say, great, we're going to invite an artist to DC, and we're going to send them to Philadelphia or New York City or on tour in North America. We're really working to have Solas Nua be a hub, that we invite them to Washington, D.C., sure, but then we are beginning to ask the question, where else can we send them? We're doing that with the film festival right now. Artists, we're partnered with film festivals in Seattle, Chicago, New York City, that an Irish artist coming to DC means that they're also going to go to a bunch of other locations.
Yeah, it strikes me that there's a strong need for that kind of coordinated plan. It costs money, obviously, to bring somebody over, dealing with visa stuff, etc. So increased expertise in that. But it also strikes me that you have to be, being in DC, it's interesting because of the lack of a facility, your own facility. And I accept that it's actually in many respects a strength. You also have to be more of a diplomat because you're going to be working with many different organizations and you have to cultivate those relationships. Now, you're 2 years in that position. How long is it taking you to get up and running and understand the ecosystem around DC?
Well, I'm still learning. I still have a list of 20 partners that Solas Nua has worked with in the past that I haven't been able to sit down and say, we want to bring Irish arts to your venue. But I'm familiar with the Irish producing side. I got one of my master's degrees from the University of Galway, and that's actually where I directed my first professional show in the Town Hall studio in Galway, and began producing Irish work in Galway way back when. And so coming into this role, it was very easy for me to pick up on some of those relationships. I've paid attention to it since I've been away from producing Irish work. And now that I'm in DC, there are a ton of places that we have long-standing partnerships with. And luckily the team, Rex, our board, are very active in maintaining partnerships all across town.
One of the things that we try and do on the podcast is understand people's Irish identity. And so I'm going to throw this one to Rex. Your last name is Daugherty.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how you pronounce it, because there's different pronunciations of your name.
Sure.
And you're from Oklahoma originally, I believe. So tell me a little bit about your Irish identity and your origin point.
Yeah, I grew up Oklahoman. My family has been in the States for several generations. There was no cultural connection to an Irish identity other than literally we would just go, we're Irish. But there was no songs, there was no stories, we didn't know modern Irish politics, that we didn't know anyone, family member who was Irish.
Did you know anything about the original ancestor that came through? Do you have any sense
We've
of that?
since done that work, but like my sister and I in high school were kind of like, we're Irish, what does that mean? And we just start doing our own research. But it was like so many people in the United States, you have to rediscover that and unearth that for yourself. And then I honestly, through Solas Nua, have become more proud of and more connected to an Irish heritage and just Irish identity. I first went to Ireland in 2004 when I was studying abroad. I did a trip to London. I studied theater in undergrad and just went for a short trip to Ireland. And then again with my sister, she studied at UCC in Cork and went over for another trip and just slowly started being like, this feels right. But that was just nostalgia. We were creating it. There was, again, nothing we really knew about it. But then when I got cast in Disco Pigs with Solas Nua, there was something about Enda Walsh has become such a celebrated playwright that I was just hooked by the innovation and the power of the writing. And it helped that there was some sort of backstory of we're vaguely Irish, but I really cared that it was just world class and it was just incredible work. I think I since then reverse engineered and figured out what is it about Irish identity, about this small country that continues to have an outsized presence around the world, diplomatically, artistically, its people, like its diaspora. But to me, it's about, a few years ago, we were producing the U.S. premiere of E.C. Adigan and Roddy Doyle's adaptation of the Playboy of the Western World that the Abbey Theatre had done in 2007, but no one had touched it since, and we were doing the North American premiere. And we sit down at opening night, and someone, another theater maker in Washington says, oh, it's a Solas Nua show because it's set in a bar. And I said, a pub. And she goes, what's the difference? And I was like, a bar is where you go to drink. A pub is where you go for the story. And I think I've since, through the arts, come to understand something so important about Irish culture is how the public house, whether it's an actual public house or the metaphor of it, is a gathering place for storytelling, for gossip, for what's going on in the next town over, for humor, for grief. There's the collective gathering place. And I've just been so touched by that, and we try to carry that ethos with us of, we don't have a building, we don't have a pub, but we can carry that idea of we want to make a place in our hearts, in our minds for what is the best Irish storytelling now, and let's gather around that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've learned in doing 4 years of this podcast is the extraordinary power of Irish narrative, the superpower that Irish people carry. And many times they don't realize it because it is the oxygen that they inhale.
Yeah.
It is their normalcy. And so a lot of times when Irish people come to America, I have to remind them that this is a thing that you have. I was struck by an episode that we did with a gentleman by the name of Mark Little, who was a well-known journalist in Ireland and turned into a digital entrepreneur. And he told me, growing up in Dublin, sitting in the pub, you basically got 90 seconds as the conversation swung. And if you were going to tell a story, you had 90 seconds to get people, or otherwise they would move on. So there's a discipline. When we think of pubs, maybe we don't think of discipline, but there is a discipline of narrative and communication there. I think that's a lot of times underappreciated. And I think it finds its voice in different ways in literature, in theater, and we're now seeing it obviously in film and your wonderful film festival here. I'm going to switch to Andrew. We're playing ping pong here. I understand your roots are from Minnesota, and your family, I believe, come from the Ulster area, if I'm correct?
Yep.
And they came over to America around the 1840s, 1850s, making them famine people. But what do you know of all that?
They came over in the 1850s, or they settled in Minnesota in the 1850s on a plot of land in southwest Minnesota, and they have really been there ever since. I grew up on a farm 1 mile away from that site. So I grew up in the house that my dad grew up, that my grandfather bought, that was just a mile away from where he grew up. And it's been a group of farmers holding that space ever since. And so my connection to the Irishness or the Irish heritage has been folks who came over in 1850 and have continued traditions of storytelling and music. And we still get together as a family every year for a 2-day family gathering that includes storytelling and music in southwestern Minnesota.
What kind of farming?
Corn and soybeans.
So
with
standard Midwest.
Much with some hobby animals. Usually sometimes there's horses, chickens, cows. We've had pigs in the past. There's a turkey or two.
And was the Irish thing always emphasized? It's unusual, I think, for somebody, there's probably 6 or 7 generations there, that they would know that kind of deeper familial history. I suppose it's because they're very rooted in one place.
Yeah.
But was that part of your upbringing? You were Irish?
Very much. Even though generations move away, we've always had a strong family gathering point to come back to southwest Minnesota every year and celebrate our roots and hang out and tell stories of our family's history, going back multiple generations of telling stories about my grandfather and his grandfather and passing that on in an oral tradition.
Yeah. And on your resume, clearly theater is a big thing in your life. And sometimes when I talk about theatre in Ireland, I would say Ireland doesn't have the strongest of theatre traditions when compared to, let's say, their literary tradition. And my take on it is very simple, is Irish people ended up doing the cheapest things possible, which was playing music and telling stories. And then if you don't tell stories, maybe you want to write stories down. They were all relatively cheap things to do. And then when you elevate it a little bit more, then you start going into theatrical production. Now, that might be a fallacious take, but that's how I see it. So disabuse me of that or reflect on that.
I might push back on that in the sense of, even at a small liberal arts college in Oklahoma, where I studied undergrad, the Abbey and Irish theater was part of our curriculum as part of the canon of world theater. Playwright of the Western World and what Yeats and Lady Gregory were doing, Kathleen Houlihan, and then later O'Casey. But all of that was part of the core world theater curriculum. I know the Abbey is in a anniversary year. You had a national theater before you had the country, and how the theater actually has led a lot of the psyche of, and the arts leading that idea of national identity, which is a pretty incredible tradition and a very proud one. I remember I had researched this in undergrad, but I believe one of the first people killed in the 1916 Rising was a stagehand from the Abbey Theater, and just how close sort of art and politics were at that time, and how theater was really central to that. I hear what you're saying about the access to the folk arts are a bit more...
So what I'm thinking is, I guess maybe my perspective is a little bit different because I grew up in Ireland, and so where we're looking at the Abbey, which was founded in 1904, that to me is comparatively recent history. When you look at Irish tradition, which stretches back hundreds and hundreds of years.
Sure.
And I know there's other theatrical stuff. I grew up in Dublin, so for example, you have the original performance of Handel's Messiah taking place right in the heart of inner city Dublin in a theatre right there. So theatre has been there for a while, but I don't think it quite had the same impact. And I do take your point that a distinctly Irish theatre is birthed in the Abbey Theatre, and it's really bound tightly into the Irish identity and quest
and celebrated
for
around the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that the birth of the Irish theater, if we're referring to the beginnings of the Abbey in that way, were at the forefront of similar movements in other countries. While England has a long history of playwriting, the concept of how theater as we think of it today was really in that 1880s, and a pivot towards we're going to put something that is scripted and produced and directed on a stage. So it's not unique to Ireland in that other communities didn't necessarily have that version of theater moving forward. But one of the things that outside of the history of the beginnings of say, a national theater. One of the things that I have appreciated, both living in Galway and working with artists and even the Drama Society in Galway, is that there is within the culture that if you get a few people together, you can make a show. And that was a much stronger impulse that I felt more in my time in Galway than, say, like where I grew up or at my college. The only way to do a show at my university was like, you have to join the theater department and you have to become a major, and then you have to go through a casting process, where there are so many drama societies in Ireland that allow folks much more readily available access to be like, hey, let's put on a show, let's figure out storytelling on a stage.
Yeah, I think there's some virtue for those that don't put barriers in the way of creating something.
Yeah.
In thinking about this, I think we have way too many people consuming passively without really understanding that they can also be creative, and creating those opportunities or shifting that mindset is beneficial in so many ways because it gets you out of your bubble.
Yeah.
We live in a world where people are increasingly isolated. COVID, I think everybody started installing large screen TVs, and now consequently don't go to the movie theater. So sitting last night in the movie theater, in this wonderful movie theater in AFI in Silver Spring, it's just gorgeous space. I'm very happy because I'm overgrown and I have leg room, and it's just really nice to sit with great acoustics and a big old screen. It was just special. But is part of your brief, you're bringing the best Irish arts in, but how do we have a role here to stimulate Irish arts in the sense of getting people involved in that may not have traditionally been involved from a performance point of view?
As far as like getting people involved, I am actively looking for ways to bridge our international communities, particularly between artists. Like our current model is mostly we either produce a show, and that's an Irish playwright with a local team, or we present a show and we bring it over from Ireland and they tour DC and then tour the States or North America. But there's very little interaction and cross-pollination. So I am trying to actively figure out, how do we get artists working together across countries, across borders? I find that increasingly important. And one of the ways that we're doing that is commissioning. We've done a lot of co-commissions of, all right, we're going to take a African-American artist and pair them with an Irish artist to create a story, make a commission that would, a specific story we'd like them to tell, and then get the cross-pollination there. And I find that DC is such an international city, it's such a city concerned with the world, that Irish perspectives about the world, local perspectives about the world, getting those together to talk to each other is really rich material. And people are really responding to that wing of Solas.
I think it's really important to get people feeling that they are encouraged to have a creative experience. We need people sitting in the seats watching what's created, but we also need people to think, hey, I can do that too. And I think, you're doing what we just described as we're doing that on a level. How do we do more of it is, the question.
When you think about what communities that we serve, we're serving DC audiences, and we are working to try to find the best new Irish work that they can enjoy. There is an area of growth for us to be able to, when we invite an artist here, oftentimes we're hosting not the artist, but also asking them to do a master class that is able to serve DC artists while that Irish artist is in town. But that's certainly an area that we should be looking at, of what are ways that folks can be engaging in the creative practice along with Irish artists. And that's one of the programs that Rex is working on this year. We're working with Fish Amble to partner their show in the bag model with DC-based artists, but they are getting guidance from Fish Amble dramaturgs. And so that's a way that we're saying, yes, there is an amazing method that Fish Amble has used, and they have a keen eye towards dramaturgy and storytelling, and how can we bring that to some of the DC artists that we serve.
Yeah, I was trying to reinterpret our mission because we presenter producer commission the best of contemporary Ireland, but sometimes that's so focused about the stage or the screen or what gets produced, and that's just a limited amount of opportunity. But where are the development opportunities? Our traditional model is very either playwright or generative artist focused. So I was like, Irish dramaturgs have a lot to offer DC artists. What if we work with these Irish dramaturgs to help develop local stories from DC actors who are maybe the first time writing their own play? And Fish Amble started that project just after 2008 as a response to the global housing crash, as a way to empower artists to like, hey, there's all these theater spaces that are now empty, fill them with actors empowered to have their own vehicle. And so we're facing another uncertain economic times, particularly for arts funding. So we're looking at, that's an interesting model to help DC artists get a show of theirs out and empower through Irish playmaking, but essentially a show that is a DC-made show.
So looking out into the future, major plans, major hopes. You reflected on the fact that we're now living in Washington, D.C., where there's a lot of uncertainty. Keeping that in mind, how do you see the future developing from a Solas Nua perspective?
We spent the last few years investing in this hub model where we can say yes to an artist, and it's a yes to bringing them to DC, but it's also building a network so that way they're able to go from DC to other cities. I get many requests from an Irish artist, an Irish author, sitting somewhere on the island trying to book their own tour because they just got published for the first time in the US, and they're sending me an email, and it's essentially cold calling venues all over the US, and that has to be a labor intensive and scary thing where they're working so hard to promote their own work. And because we're doing this every year, it's for us to begin to develop that network of spots so that way when an author does get their first US book published, then we can say, great, we have a list of 12 universities, venues, bookshops that we've worked with over the past. We can help you coordinate that. We can do the initial contacts and the emails. We can help with that tour. Similarly with film, we're absolutely thrilled with the success of the Capital Irish Film Festival, but that's one part of the year, and there's so much more amazing film work that's coming out of Ireland. So the question that we're sitting with right now is, what can Solas Nua contribute to Irish film getting in front of more folks? So that very well could look like film tours where we take a film on the road, that we can, using our relationships, have a university tour of a really impactful film and be able to schedule that with the filmmaker. Or we have great success right now with what we call the Capital Irish Film Festival at Home, where we put a film online for one night for folks to view. And in DC, the numbers, the folks who turn in are quite large. And at the same time, Solas Nua is a part of this group called, we call it NACONA, but it's the Network of Irish Cultural Centers of North America. And there are like 40 or 50 Irish homes, community centers, venues, places that house like dance and libraries of Irish work and Irish hotspots for communities all across North America. And being able to find programming, since we're investing already here to do it in DC, being able to help other Irish centers as they work to serve their community, saying, hey, we have a curatorial team, we have the staff in place, we can start sending our work to these other centers.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And you were talking about the digital movie, so to speak. Is it important to, as I understand it, it is a window in which you can watch that film.
Yep.
So people are coming together digitally, if you will. Is there a component to that where people interact, Or are they just simply watching the film remotely? How does that work?
There was the ability to stream it for several weeks. You could watch it at home. And then there was a live component of like a talk back with the artist. Some people could gather for that, or you could still tune in for the talk back. We have people tuning in from around the country for that. And so you could stream that. So there was a gathered space. I think what Zoom and the pandemic taught us is the gathering space can be different. It can look different than being in a room together. But we're still reinventing what the future of, particularly for the film program. Film works so well on screen because it's already a medium that exists on the screen. I think a lot of people don't want to see more theater on the screen. We're still reinventing what the gathering space is.
How about the equivalent of the equivalent of the old radio plays?
We did a series of those, I think it was 21 or 22, where we ran with RTE. We did a co-presentation of RTE radio dramas where I just curated that, and then there was a post-show discussion. We essentially called them listening parties. So we all gathered online to listen to the streaming that's available. You didn't have to gather with us to listen to it, but what we would have is a Q&A with an actor or the writer or the director afterwards, and I would interview them, let people ask questions to that artist. So again, that was another way of rethinking gathering space. But it went well. It worked well because it returned to an older form of storytelling of just the radio drama.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the pandemic and the Zoom experiences allowed us to rethink how you get people engaged in different ways. Like you could do a finished product, essentially the equivalent of a radio play via podcast, and then do a talk back as the more live component where you're pulling people together.
We have a successful model right now. Solas Nua actually has an online book group that meets every single week, and we alternate between fiction, nonfiction, poetry, and then a classic usually. And you can take a look on our website and see all of the books that are coming up that are going to be discussed for the next few months. The Zoom link is there. Folks are invited to read the book and then pop on for a discussion. And that's happening every week. And as we look to increase the offerings of film that we do online, that's another model that we're looking towards, that folks will be able to watch the film and then maybe in a few days hop on for a film discussion.
It's also like a way of, and I know this phrase is going around Ireland a lot, of showing without going. And just as we think about sustainability and carbon footprint, we used to think in terms of plane flights to America, of like, how do we get the artist from here to there? And our book club has really taught us, we like being online. Every seat is a front row seat when we have an author come visit. They used to be, if they were 15 rows back, they were like, I can't even see the expression on the face of the reading, but now we'll have an author pop in for something and they're all right there with them in the Zoom room. Different ways of showing without going, and it's exciting to think about.
So unfortunately we're getting to that time. I have to say thank you to you both. You've given me a lot of food for thought, not just simply in the challenges, but also the benefits of essentially a virtual organization in many respects, but also with deep roots in the immediate physical community that is Washington, D.C. I think it's a fascinating model. Looking forward, 20 years in, congratulations. What do we look at upcoming that you would like to flag to our listeners?
Solas Nua over the last 20 years has presented the work of over 1,000 Irish artists. And as we look to where Solas Nua began was with Enda Walsh. And so, Rex, could you talk a little bit about what's happening this summer?
Yeah, I'm super excited. I reached out to Enda, and of course we did so much of his work in the early years, and I just said, what do you want to do? What's helpful for you right now? And
that makes an artist happy.
Exactly. I didn't want to just pick a program and say, we're going to remount Disco Pigs or Bedbound or whatever. We want to lead with the question of, what is an artist excited about? What do you need? What do you need? And we just had a conversation from there. And essentially, Enda and I have curated an Enda Walsh festival that we're going to bring Enda to DC for a week. He's going to do a workshop of something new. It's not even a new play yet. It's just a new idea. And his amazing mad mind is, I'm just going to throw some words at this thing. He's even using text from a previous play because that's how new and fresh this idea is. So he's going to work with some local actors on that. We're going to do 3 play readings from 3 different moments of his career. And Enda will be there to discuss how his writing process has evolved. He says every 5 years or so, he tries to reinvent himself and just throw out what he's done and work in a new way, which to me is so inspiring as an artist to see someone who could cruise. He's writing for MGM right now, and just these major motion pictures, he could cash in and be like, thanks everybody, but he's still inventing himself, and that is such a brave space to be in as an artist. So he's going to talk about what changed through his writing process at these 3 different pieces. We hope to screen some of his films. He's working in the film industry in such an amazing way right now. And then Ben Brantley, formerly from the New York Times, who has been a huge champion of Enda's work, is going to come down and interview Enda in a public discussion of his work. So it's all packed in over a weekend, so similar to the SIF festival here, but it's going to be a brilliant time and a great way to celebrate 20 years of looking at almost 2 generations of Enda's work and looking forward to who is the next generation. And in the fall, we're producing Kira Elizabeth Smith. It'll be a U.S. premiere of this play, which is Lie Low, and which I saw in the Dublin Fringe, and Enda mentored her. They won the Next Generation Mentor-Mentee Award. And it's just a great way to celebrate. Here are some of the best writers coming out of the Irish theater scene, 2 different generations over 20 years of contemporary Irish arts from Solas Nua.
And so with that, I'd like to thank both Andrew Dolan, Executive Director of Solas Nua, Rex Daugherty, Artistic Director of Theatre of Solas Nua, for giving us a deeper insight about the organization, and remind us of the website where people should look forward to this exciting program and all the exciting programs, not just in this program.
Yeah, it's solasnua.org, SOLASNUA.org. Solas Nua means new light.
Thank you both.
Thanks very much.
A big thank you to all the folks at Solas Nua who made my visit to the nation's capital so engaging. Having spent 4 days at the Capital Irish Film Festival, I can affirm that Solas Nua is an organisation that is punching well above its weight, and I can strongly recommend the many wonderful people who made those days such a memorable experience. There will be more episodes featuring conversations I recorded at the festival, but next week I return to our Lost in Belfast series featuring poet Linda McKenna, who blends a deep knowledge of history with lyrical words to broaden our understanding of life and Ireland. So until then, this is Martin Nutty, and you've been listening to the Irish Stew Podcast. Irish Stew is produced by John Lee, Martin Nutty, and Bill Schultz. Editing, mixing, and mastering by Bill Schultz. Music on Irish Stew was composed and performed by Rosa Nutty, with Donald Bowens on drums, Cathal O'Riordan on bass and synthesizer. For more on Rosa Nutty's music, please visit rosanutty.com.